Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something oddly comforting, definitely not glamorous, and just perfect for dozing off, too. The mysterious world of Viking hygiene. Picture this. The North Sea wind is howling outside. Your boots are damp from a slosh through the fjord, and you duck into a long, low wooden building packed with smoke, noise, and a distinct scent of, well, something alive. Something very, very alive. That, my sleepy friend, is the Viking longhouse. You probably won't survive this wintry scene, not because of the raids or the sword fights, but because you're a 21st century human who thinks dry shampoo is a survival item and has no tolerance for what you're about to smell. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far this sleepy little channel travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the creaky door. It groans like it's tired too. Inside, the smoky haze from a central hearth swirls around you. There's a fire going, great for warmth, not great for your lungs. It's the Viking version of central heating, minus the carbon monoxide detector. The walls are lined with hanging pelts and half-cured meats. A few kids scramble past your legs, trailing the unmistakable scent of dirt and dried fish. It's cozy, kind of. You find a spot near the fire. The floor is packed earth, and it's surprisingly warm. Thanks to body heat, livestock tucked in the corners, and layers of hay and straw that may or may not have been swept this month. You're already reconsidering your decision to sit down in that tunic. The man beside you nods. His beard is glorious, neatly combed, oiled, and slightly perfumed with what might be pine resin. His face is streaked with soot and something that could be dried blood or just enthusiasm from earlier axe practice. You can't be sure. He's got a leather pouch on his belt, and from it, he pulls a bone comb, carefully dragging it through his beard like he's preparing for a first date or a battle, or both. This is your first glimpse into the surprisingly meticulous world of Norse grooming. Because while they didn't have Irish Spring or frosted body wash, they did care. Quite a lot, actually. Historians still argue whether Vikings were truly clean by modern standards. The word itself is tricky. Our idea of clean involves bacteria-free, lemon-scented surfaces. For Vikings, clean was a whole different vibe. It meant being not visibly filthy, not lice-ridden, and, ideally, not offending Odin's nose. And yet, here's the twist. Foreign chroniclers often remarked on Viking cleanliness with surprise. The Anglo-Saxons, who weren't exactly skipping through lavender fields themselves, grumbled that Norse raiders bathed once a week and combed their hair regularly, using it to charm local women and scandalize the priesthood. It's basically the medieval version of your boyfriend smells better than me, and I don't know how to handle that. But the longhouse itself? A mixed bag of smells. On one hand, it's a multifunctional marvel, living space, sleeping quarters, kitchen, and sometimes barn, all rolled into one. On the other, it's also a glorified petting zoo with a chimney problem. The hearth smoke clings to everything, your clothes, your beard, your eyebrows. It preserves food and people alike, whether they want it or not. You breathe in again. Beneath the ash and wet wool, there's also the smell of fermented herring. Not unpleasant, just assertive. Someone nearby is rubbing seal fat on a leather tunic, humming softly. The children return, this time dragging sticks and chasing a chicken. No one stops them. The longhouse's darkness hides many things. Behind a wooden partition, someone is quietly working with a bone needle, stitching what looks like wool underwear. Further back, an elderly woman stirs a thick stew that has apparently included the same cabbage since last autumn. Hygiene here is not just about washing. It's about managing the constant layering of smells, textures, and minor bodily chaos. Outside, the wind moans again. You imagine trying to bathe in that. And yet they did. You'll get to that part soon. But for now, rest in the crackling warmth of the hearth, surrounded by the organized disorder of Viking life. A few more locals shuffle in. One removes his boots and tips them upside down. Two small beetles fall out, hit the floor, and keep moving like this is normal. And honestly, it kind of is. Shoes, like longhouses, were multi-use. You wore them until they disintegrated or until a beetle colony declared squatters' rights. A loud laugh breaks out from a corner, followed by the soft clink of drinking horns. Someone's telling a story about a sheep, a barrel of ale, and a fishing accident. The details are unclear, but laughter travels well here. It mixes with the warmth, the gloom, and yes, the funk. It's oddly comforting. A man dozes on a pile of pelts. You could join him, but your curiosity keeps you upright for now. You're starting to see that Viking dirtiness is a bit of a modern myth. There's intention here. Ritual. Pride, even. They didn't just stew in their own smells, they curated them. Like a musk of survival, with notes of pine, salt, and peat smoke. Someone hands you a small wooden bowl. Inside is warm mead, honey-sweet and mildly sour. It slides down your throat with a gentle burn. You sigh content, then wrinkle your nose. The guy next to you just scratched his armpit and sniffed his fingers. Nobody reacts. This is just life. And just as you settle deeper into the warmth and scent of Viking hospitality, you realize the fire's crackle is starting to lull you. You blink slowly, eyelids heavy. You're not asleep yet, but you're getting there. You wake, or half-wake, to the rhythmic clack of wood against wood. A woman across the longhouse is scrubbing something vigorously in a shallow trough. You shift slightly on your fur pile, feeling the stiffness in your back from sleeping on what is essentially glorified straw, and turn your head. She's washing clothing. More specifically, a tunic that has clearly seen better centuries. The water in the trough is grayish and steaming slightly, and she's using what looks like a brush made from bundled twigs. You expect soap, but there is none. Because, surprise, the Vikings didn't really use soap. Not the bubbly, lavender-scented kind you're imagining. Instead, they relied on a surprisingly diverse range of alternatives, some logical, some questionable, and a few that would make your dermatologist weep. To understand it, you first need to wrap your head around what soap even was back then. Technically, the concept existed. Ancient Romans had a soap-like substance made from animal fat and ash. Some Germanic tribes knew how to make lye soap, which was harsh and smelled like punishment. But the Vikings? They were creative. Sometimes they did make their own soap-like pastes from animal fat and wood ash, especially in the later Viking Age, but early sources suggest that wasn't common for everyday bathing. Too much effort, too little fat to spare. After all, fat was food, fuel, waterproofing, and trade material. Rubbing it on your body just to smell like thyme? Not high on the priority list. Instead, Viking hygiene relied on friction, rinsing, and nature's more rustic offerings. Let's talk dirt. Literal dirt. One method involved scrubbing the skin with fine sand or clay to slough off oil and grime, a bit like a primitive exfoliation routine. It left the skin slightly red, but fresh feeling. Think of it as a natural loofah with bonus grit. Then there were the more aromatic, if slightly alarming, options. Vikings in some regions are believed to have used fermented urine. Yes, you heard that right, as a form of cleansing agent. Aged urine turns into ammonia, which has basic cleansing properties. Clothes were sometimes soaked in it to lift oils and stains, and occasionally, rumor has it, so were feet. Maybe. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just medieval gossip meant to slander the Norse. Now, the next time someone brags about their 10-step skincare routine, you can smile quietly and think of Ulf the Blackfoot standing in a wooden basin of old pee, whistling to himself. And while that might seem revolting to modern sensibilities, it's worth noting, Viking standards of cleanliness were largely about presentation, not just sterility. A groomed beard, brushed hair, clean clothes. Even if those clothes were washed in river silt or questionable fluids, mattered. We have archaeological evidence to back this up. Graves from Viking sites often include grooming kits, bone combs, ear spoons, tweezers, razors. These weren't buried as afterthoughts. They were prized possessions. You don't carry an ivory toothpick unless you plan to use it. One comb recovered from a 10th century site still had hair fragments between its teeth, possibly lice, definitely human. The handle was carved with runes that roughly translate to Thor owns me, either a divine boast or the medieval version of writing your name on your favorite lip balm. And those tools weren't just for vanity. Lice and fleas were real problems in the cramped longhouses. Grooming meant survival. One child infested with lice could turn the entire sleeping area into an itchy nightmare. So combing wasn't optional, it was daily discipline. You shift again on your pile of furs and try not to think about what may be nesting in your own imaginary Viking hair. Outside, the light is brighter now, just a pale smear through the smoke holes in the ceiling. You hear someone dumping a bucket of water outside, followed by loud spitting and then a content grunt. Morning dental care, perhaps. No toothbrushes here, but toothpicks made of bone and bits of birch bark did the trick. Sort of. Inside, someone's whittling. A young man carves a small, spoon-shaped tool, likely an ear cleaner, which was an actual thing. Ear spoons have been found in Viking graves too, because apparently clean ears were next to godliness, or at least next to not hearing the insults hurled at you during long winters. You get the sense that cleanliness, in this world, is a practice, not a state you achieve, but one you manage. Constantly. With limited tools, a lot of patience, and maybe a tolerance for your neighbor's feet being just a little bit too close to your dinner bowl. Historians debate how much of this cleanliness was driven by health versus habit. Some argue it was about status. Being well-kept meant you had time and resources. Others believe it had ritual connotations, especially before religious events or battles. Most likely, it was both. Because in a world where the gods might literally show up during your breakfast, you didn't want to look like you'd rolled in sheep dung. Speaking of which, yes, sheep dung made appearances too. Not for cleaning, thankfully, but sometimes as fuel, sometimes as medicine, and occasionally as, let's say, a prank ingredient. Never underestimate the Viking sense of humor. The woman across the room finishes her laundry task and wrings out the tunic. She hangs it near the fire, not on it. Lessons learned the hard way, no doubt. The smell of warm wool and wood smoke fills the air. Nearby, a boy helps his father trim his beard with a small iron blade. It's a sweet moment. Rough hands, gentle touch. The man winces occasionally, but doesn't complain. Looking sharp is worth a little blood loss, apparently. You lean back, listening to the hum of quiet tasks. The scrape of bone on skin, the splash of water, the low murmur of voices speaking in a language you can't understand but somehow recognize. There's rhythm here, a kind of sleepy efficiency, and as you drift just a bit closer to sleep again, you realize something. In their own way, these people were cleaner than history gives them credit for. Maybe not by spa standards, but by theirs. They were practically pristine. You've barely closed your eyes when the door creaks open with a gust of cold wind and damp earth. A man lumbers inside, stamping mud from his boots, a bundle of moss tucked under one arm like he's bringing home groceries. He nods to no one in particular, tosses the moss onto a low bench, and sets to work peeling off layers of soggy wool and leather. You blink. Wait, is that what you think it is? Yes, it is. That moss isn't just for patching leaks or cushioning clogs. It's toilet paper, or rather, the closest thing Vikings had to it. Because when it came to their, let's call them, personal bathroom moments, the Vikings were impressively resourceful. You'll find no porcelain thrones here. In fact, you won't find anything you'd recognize as a bathroom at all. Nature, as they say, was the original lavatory. You get up, stretching in your sleep-fuzzed mind, and follow the path the man took when he entered. Just in your imagination, of course. Outside the longhouse, past the pen where two disgruntled sheep are muttering to each other in bleats, lies a trench. Not deep, just enough to keep things covered. That was the outhouse. Latrines varied from settlement to settlement. Some had pits lined with wooden planks or stones. Others just dug shallow trenches out in the woods. In cities like Jorvik, modern-day York, they occasionally even had rudimentary sewer systems. But in most rural Norse communities, relieving yourself meant a short walk and the hope of no surprises underfoot. For wiping, moss was common. So was soft grass, wool scraps, or even snow. Refreshing, if bracing. Historians still argue whether certain types of moss were favored for their absorbency or their antimicrobial properties. Some claim sphagnum moss may have been deliberately harvested for both its softness and natural ability to prevent infection. Others think that's wishful thinking. More likely it was just, hey, this looks nicer than bark. You glance back toward the bundle on the bench. The man has taken a portion of it and is soaking it in warm water. Reuse, perhaps? Hard to say. Waste not, want not. But waste was also a problem. Viking towns had to manage their human byproducts carefully, especially in larger communities. Midden heaps, those charming piles of garbage, manure, and general filth, would have to be kept a safe distance from water sources. Not always successfully. Parasites and waterborne illnesses weren't uncommon. Still, the Vikings were more aware of contamination than you'd expect. They often chose to relieve themselves downstream from their settlements. And while they didn't have microscopes, they did have eyes and noses and a strong instinct for survival. By now, someone in the longhouse is poking at a clay pot over the fire. The smell of stewed onions and dried fish drifts through the air. Morning chores have merged into midday tasks, and your imaginary Viking host seems unfazed by the awkward topic of the last few paragraphs. Hygiene, after all, wasn't embarrassing here. It was just life. You watch as a woman carefully pours leftover water into a different pot, one containing lye and ash. She's making something, not food. Her grimace says that clearly. Could it be the rare, occasional batch of cleaning paste? Possibly. Soap making was practiced sometimes, especially when there was excess fat, like after a successful pig slaughter. The result wasn't exactly Dove. It was grainy, caustic, and sometimes smelled faintly like roast goat. But for the occasional deep clean, or for preening before a feast, it got the job done. That's the thing. While daily cleaning might rely on sand scrubs and cold river splashes, feasts and special occasions were a different matter entirely. You're now mentally at one such feast. Maybe it's a Yule celebration. Picture this. The men are clean-shaven, by Viking standards, and hair is combed, braided, even scented. Yes, they sometimes used herbs or even birch sap to perfume their bodies. Sage rubbed into the armpits. Rosemary burned near clothes. One old poem even jokes about a warrior who smelled of mint but fought like a goat. Not exactly the Hall of Fame roast, but close. And it wasn't just the men. Women took pride in their appearance too. Clean shifts, neatly tied aprons, plaited hair. They often wore simple makeup made from natural ochres, reddish powders that gave the cheeks a healthy glow. Eye-darkening charcoal was not unknown either, especially in wealthier families with trade access. But let's circle back. Because the real question is, where did all the waste go after a feast? Outside, of course. Dumped. Flung. Sometimes composted, sometimes burned. One of the more curious archaeological finds is the sheer variety of stuff found in Viking trash pits, everything from broken combs and fish bones to cracked spindle whorls, and, intriguingly, tiny bronze amulets shaped like male anatomy. Historians still argue whether those were fertility charms or just Norse gag gifts. As you walk past the latrine trench again, the moss bundle from earlier now damp and fragrant, you're struck by how practical this all is. No marble, no scented candles, no live, laugh, love signs etched into pine. Just necessity, plus moss. And maybe, in a strange way, a kind of pride. Cleanliness, to the Vikings, wasn't about purity or showiness, it was about readiness. You kept your nails clean, so you could grip a sword. You cleaned your clothes so lice didn't slow you down. You combed your beard not to impress, but to belong. You hear laughter from inside the longhouse. Someone's telling a story, something about slipping in the snow while trying to, well, handle business. There's a universal humor in bodily matters, it seems, even when your bathroom is a hole in the forest. And with that thought, you settle again into your mind's quiet fur pile. The hearth crackles. A breeze rattles the doorframe. Someone hums a lullaby in Old Norse, and the moss sits, modestly noble, on its wooden bench. Later that same dreamlike day, with the scent of peat smoke still clinging to your imaginary clothes, you wander into another part of the settlement. It's quieter here, less bustle, more order. A row of small wooden huts, each with a smoke hole carved carefully into the slanted roof, stands in tidy symmetry. You realize, with a blink of surprise, that you've stumbled into something unexpected, the Viking version of a bathhouse. Yes, a bathhouse. Don't look so surprised, because for all the mud, blood, and fish guts of daily Norse life, the Vikings were surprisingly into cleanliness, at least by the standards of early medieval Europe. And once a week, like clockwork, came the big event, Saturday Bath Day. That's not even an exaggeration. The word laugardagr in Old Norse literally means washing day. It survives in modern Scandinavian languages, lordag in Danish and Norwegian, lauantai in Finnish. The entire day was named for bathing. You peek through the cracked door of one hut and see it. A low, steamy room filled with heat and haze. Smooth stones circle a fire pit in the center. Around them, buckets of water and bundles of birch twigs lie waiting. A Viking man, his shirt off and beard damp, is carefully pouring water over the hot rocks. Steam hisses upward. You instinctively step back, blinking as warmth rushes out to greet you. Welcome to the log, or bathhouse, a hybrid of steam sauna and sweat lodge. And if you think this feels a bit Finnish, you're not wrong. The Vikings and their eastern cousins, the Finns and Sami peoples, likely influenced one another in their love for steam, sweat, and skin beating with twigs. The man inside is joined by two others. They sit together, chatting quietly, sometimes singing, sometimes just staring into the mist. One begins lightly slapping his arms with a leafy branch, stimulating the skin, encouraging circulation, and, yes, brushing off sweat and grime. Birch twigs were preferred, fresh if possible, dried if not. Soaked in hot water, they became flexible and fragrant. Their gentle sting wasn't unpleasant, more like a forest hug that bites a little. Now, did every Viking town have a bathhouse? No, but many did, especially wealthier settlements. Archaeological digs in places like Hedeby and Reykjavik have uncovered bath-like structures, small rooms with stone floors, central fire pits, and drainage channels leading outward. Not quite the luxury of Roman baths, but for a people often thought of as wild barbarians, this is a solid win. Historians still argue whether these bathhouses were strictly for washing or also served ritual and social purposes. Some think they were the original gossip hubs. Others suggest they doubled as quiet meditation spaces, perhaps even linked to spiritual cleansing. You, meanwhile, are starting to sweat just from watching. It's cozy in here. One man hums a folk tune, something low and repetitive. Someone makes a joke about smelling less like cod and more like pine, and everyone chuckles. You wonder where the women are. Likely bathing separately. Norse societies were not overly strict about gender separation, but in this case, privacy was likely preferred. Some homes had small bath sheds attached, especially in colder climates where traipsing to a shared bathhouse meant frostbite on your behind. For those without access to a full bathhouse, washing took place in rivers, lakes, or inside, using heated water and wooden basins. Hair was washed less frequently, but still washed, often with lye-based solutions or plain hot water. Combing was vital, not just for style, but for lice control. Combs, in fact, are among the most commonly found artifacts in Viking graves. Beautifully carved, often ivory or antler, and clearly treasured. Imagine, you're combing your hair with a piece of polished reindeer bone, while steam curls around your ankles and birch leaves rustle faintly with every flick of the wrist. That's not so barbaric, is it? Let's not romanticize it too much, though. Viking bathhouses weren't exactly spa retreats. The smoke could get thick, the rocks occasionally exploded if not properly dried, and if you forgot your birch bundle, well, that was a very awkward walk back to your house in a towel made of rough wool. Still, there was something almost sacred about it. Clean skin, clean spirit, ready for the next raid, or the next harvest, or just another week of trying not to slip into a freezing fjord while collecting duck eggs. One surprising twist? Foreigners noticed the Viking obsession with grooming. An Arab traveler named Ahmad ibn Fadlan wrote about the Rus, a Norse people he encountered along the Volga. He described them as tall, blonde, heavily tattooed, and shockingly fond of daily washing, especially compared to some of their more sedentary neighbors. He He sounded vaguely annoyed by how often they combed their hair and changed their clothes. But you can almost hear the undertone, a grudging respect. As the bathhouse steams up and your imaginary skin tingles with dry heat, you marvel at the paradox. The Vikings, remembered as raiders and conquerors, were also fastidious combers, enthusiastic bathers, and lovers of a good sweat and scrub. Someone pours more water over the rocks. More hiss, more fog. A birch twig snaps and releases a waft of green perfume. Then, in your drowsy mind, you hear the soft whistle of wind against the walls of the hut. Outside, the fjord glitters, cold and clean. Inside, someone hums again. A lullaby? A drinking song slowed down? Hard to tell. All you know is, it's deeply, absurdly relaxing. The steam fades gently behind you as you step back into the fresh air, cheeks warm and damp, and now you notice something curious. There's a scent in the air. Not quite pleasant, not exactly bad, but earthy, smoky, slightly metallic. You follow it like a sleepwalker, curious despite yourself. It leads you to a small wooden shed, not much larger than a closet. Inside, you find a collection of odd jars and pouches, oils, powders, pastes, none of them labeled. A middle-aged woman in a woolen tunic is stirring something in a clay bowl. She glances up and grins. You're about to learn the real Viking hygiene toolkit. Because for all the birch twig thwacking and steam room sweating, the Norse weren't just about water. They had products. Primitive, yes, but practical. Think of it as an early medieval version of a bathroom shelf. First up, lye soap. Not the cozy, lavender-scented bar you'd find in a spa basket today, but something a bit more intense. This stuff was homemade, brewed from a mixture of wood ash and animal fat, and highly alkaline. It could clean just about anything, including you, but it stung if it got in your eyes, and definitely wasn't pH balanced for sensitive skin. Still, it did the job. And in a time when greasy residue was a daily feature of life. Thanks to cooking fires, animal skins, and sweat, it was better than nothing. The woman in the hut, let's call her Inga, carefully spoons some gritty white powder into a pouch and ties it with a strip of sinew. It's not flour. It's chalk or clay, used for scouring tough stains or absorbing oil from hair. Some Vikings used ashes this way too, rubbing them into their scalp as a kind of dry shampoo before brushing it all out. Historians still argue whether these ash-based cleansers were used daily or just before major events, like weddings, festivals, or, invading a monastery. But what's clear is that grooming mattered. It wasn't just vanity, it was cultural. Vikings were judged on their appearance, and so were their enemies. An unkempt warrior was considered sloppy, possibly even unlucky. Inga shows you a tiny pot carved from bone. She pops the lid and offers a sniff. It's pungent, resin, beeswax, maybe animal fat. A rudimentary deodorant or balm, meant to be rubbed under arms or on dry skin. It wouldn't stop sweat, but it might mask the scent of goat. Next to it, a comb carved from antler, the teeth so finely spaced you could floss with them. It's stunning, delicate, even elegant, and it's not for show. You're reminded that lice were a fact of life, and daily combing helped control them. Some combs had protective cases, and some were buried with their owners. Clearly, they were treasured items. Inga gestures to a rack near the wall where an odd assortment of tools dangles. Tweezers, for plucking body hair, apparently. Ear spoons, yes, spoons, for earwax, and what might be a toothpick. It looks like a scene from a minimalist Viking Sephora. There's even a kind of early toothpaste, crushed charcoal mixed with mint or herbs. It wouldn't whiten your teeth, but it might freshen your breath long enough to impress the local blacksmith. Or intimidate a monk. It's worth pausing to remember that many Viking men wore eyeliner. Dark kohl, similar to what you'd see in ancient Egypt, applied around the eyes to reduce glare from snow and water. It also happened to look good. Chroniclers from other cultures often remarked, sometimes admiringly, sometimes disdainfully, on how well-groomed and fussy the Norsemen were. Which brings us to one of the weirdest things in the Viking hygiene arsenal: urine. Yes, human urine. You look suspiciously at a large ceramic pot in the corner, half full of something yellowish. Inga doesn't offer it to you directly, but you're pretty sure she's using it in some way. A few seconds later, you're proven correct. See, stale urine contains ammonia. Ammonia is a powerful cleanser, and for Vikings, it was especially useful when doing laundry. Clothes soaked in aged urine would come out far cleaner than with water alone. The smell? Well, that faded after rinsing probably. Maybe. Hopefully. Inga, practical to the core, is not shy about it. Clean is clean. This opens a small floodgate in your mind. If they used lye soap, ash scrub, and pea-soaked linen, what didn't they use? Animal brains? Bird feathers? Turns out, probably not. But they were resourceful. Whatever the land offered, they tested. Some Viking communities even experimented with resin paste for hairstyling. Not exactly pomade, but enough to keep those famous braids from unraveling during a 3-day sail through North Sea gales. And about those braids, they weren't universal. Some Norse wore their hair long and loose. Others clipped it short. Beard styles varied wildly, some oiled, some braided, some wildly unkempt. There's no single Viking look. But if the sagas are to be believed, people certainly noticed when someone cleaned up well. You run a finger down the polished antler comb and catch your reflection in a small bronze disc. Not a mirror, exactly, but close enough. Your imaginary Viking self looks a little flushed from the steam, hair a bit frizzy from the ash scrub. But, let's admit it, you're glowing. It's strange how human this all feels. Behind the horns Anax's stereotype, which, by the way, didn't include horned helmets, there's a soft underlayer of daily self-care. Mundane, repetitive, necessary. Soap making, lice picking, beard trimming. You start to realize this was life more than battle ever was. Outside, you hear laughter. A child runs by, chased by a dog. Inga waves you off and returns to her bowl of chalk paste. You step outside, into the chill air, and feel a weird sort of pride. You're not clean by modern standards, but you're clean enough for a Viking. The cool air wraps around you like a blanket fresh off the line. Crisp, light, oddly comforting. You feel scrubbed down and slightly pickled, but in a good way. There's a trace of ash on your fingertips, and your skin carries the mingled scent of birch, smoke, and something vaguely sheepy. You stroll slowly now, like a full-bellied cat, past the rows of turf-roofed houses, until you find yourself drawn toward another curious scene. A man is crouched near a wide wooden vat, his sleeves rolled up, forearms slick with what looks like mud. But as you get closer, you see it's not mud. It's a grayish paste, thick as porridge and clinging to everything it touches. He's scrubbing his tunic in it, methodically wringing and dunking, humming an off-key tune under his breath. Welcome to the surprisingly complex world of Viking laundry. Now, laundry might not sound glamorous. And to be fair, it wasn't. But it was essential and surprisingly advanced, given the time. After all, it's hard to look fearsome in a tunic that smells like goat stew and fish brine. Remember that urine from earlier? Here's where it comes back with a vengeance. The vat. Full of it. Aged, fermented, rich with ammonia. Vikings didn't waste good drinking water on their clothes. They used what worked. And urine, while gross to modern sensibilities, worked. It broke down oils and grime, lifting out the worst of life's daily stains. The man in the tunic, let's call him Eric, is soaking his garments in a mixture of stale urine and water, stomping them around with bare feet, like some kind of medieval winemaker with a kink for laundry. Historians still argue whether this was done weekly, monthly, or on a more seasonal schedule. Some believe clothes were only washed before major festivals or special occasions. Others suggest there were designated laundry days, especially in larger settlements. What's clear, though, is that this wasn't a once-in-a-blue-moon event. People cared about their clothes because clothes meant status. The textiles themselves were largely wool and linen. Wool, spun from sheep with naturally oily coats, had some water resistance. Linen, made from flax, was tougher to produce but prized for undergarments, cooler and softer against the skin. Cotton, forget it. Too exotic, too rare. Silk, only if you were loaded or happened to find some during a raid. Eric gives his tunic a final twist, then reaches for a flat wooden paddle. He slaps the wet garment rhythmically against a rock, grinning at the splatter. This wasn't just about rinsing. It was agitation, the Viking version of a spin cycle. The motion helped force out dirt and lingering odors, though it probably did a number on the fabric's lifespan. Viking clothes didn't exactly age gracefully. Once beaten into submission, the garments were hung to dry, usually on lines stretched between poles or over roof beams. The wind and sun would do their part, though neither was guaranteed in the misty chill of the north. Some even dried their clothes indoors, suspended over the hearth where smoke and warmth sped things along. So if your shirt smelled like a smoked ham, hey, at least it was dry. You glance to the side and see a young girl brushing something that looks like a shaggy blanket. It's a cloak, dyed with plant pigments, maybe woad or walnut, and thick with lanolin. She sprinkles fine ash onto it, rubs it in, and beats it clean with a stick. It's strangely satisfying to watch, like those cleaning videos people lose hours to online. Only now you're living one in 9th century Scandinavia. And if you're wondering, yes, laundry was often gendered. Women did most of the washing in domestic contexts, especially within the homestead. But Viking society was flexible, particularly when survival trumped tradition. In trading towns or among traveling parties, men took up the task too. There's even some evidence that traders carried little soapstones with them, portable hygiene kits, because no one wants to stink up a longboat. Which reminds you, longboats. Laundry on the move was a real issue. Imagine weeks at sea, your only washing being a splash from the occasional rainstorm or an ocean dunk. Sailors probably wore the same crusty woolens for days, or changed into a clean tunic only before arriving at port. There's a reason many Viking sagas describe warriors freshening up before battle. First impressions mattered, even if that impression came right before you axed someone. And laundry wasn't just for the living. In graves excavated across Scandinavia, archaeologists have found well-folded garments placed alongside the dead, cleaned, sometimes patched, and arranged as if for travel. Final outfits were chosen with care. A clean shirt, a comb, sometimes even a bit of perfume. Not bad for a culture we usually imagine caked in blood and grime. A sudden gust carries a whiff of wet wool and lye, and you watch as Eric drapes his tunic over a drying rack. It hangs there limply, steaming slightly in the pale sun, and you can't help but think, this is the quiet side of history. Not the battles, not the boasting, just a man washing his shirt. You reach out, almost without thinking, and feel the texture of a damp wool sleeve, rough but resilient, like everything here. And then, oddly enough, you smile. There's something grounding about this, something soft and human. In the midst of the raids, the legends, and the endless winter nights, there was still room for clean laundry. For scrubbing, wringing, drying. For combs and urine and paddle stones. And for a quiet moment where someone, just like you, stood in the breeze, watching their tunic flap in the wind, knowing that for today at least, they were clean. You're walking now through the outskirts of the settlement, where the smell of pine grows stronger and the distant creaking of wooden frames being repaired fills the air. The bath smoke still curls behind you like a lazy ghost, and you pass a group of women sitting in a circle. They're combing through bundles of long, pale flax fibers with tools that look like small torture devices, rows of iron spikes, like porcupine backs nailed to boards. But no one screaming. Just quiet chatter, occasional laughter, and the rhythmic swish of the flax being drawn through the hackles. Welcome to the world of textile prep, because before clothes could be washed, they had to be made. Now, if you're picturing Vikings as loincloth-wearing maniacs who only threw on furs when it got chilly, pause that image. Viking fashion was elaborate, deeply symbolic, and, most shockingly of all, really quite stylish. You wouldn't survive more than a few days out here without decent clothing, and not just for warmth. Your clothes told the world who you were. Wealth, status, region, even your personal honor, all stitched into your tunic seams. You duck under a drying rack where skeins of yarn will dye deep rust, mossy green, and sea blue flutter like wind chimes. Nearby, a loom sits under an awning, and a woman is seated at it, gently weaving. Her fingers move like they've done this 1,000 times, and they probably have. She works in small motions, drawing weft through warp, pressing each line down with a comb that's seen better days. Historians still argue whether Viking women wove purely for household use or if there were designated weavers in larger towns. What's not up for debate is how central textile production was to Viking life. You couldn't just order a new tunic online. Every step was labor. From shearing the sheep, cleaning and carding the wool, spinning the yarn on a drop spindle, dyeing it with foraged plants or minerals, to finally weaving it into a bolt of cloth, it could take months to create a single outfit. Fast fashion, this was not. And speaking of dyeing, remember that rust-colored yarn? That could be madder root, which produces rich reds and pinks. Blues came from woad, a pungent plant that, when fermented, smelled like feet marinated in cabbage. Yellows from birch leaves, greens from a mix of blue and yellow dyes layered in just the right order. Want to go darker? Add iron filings, or dip the fabric into lichen stew. Not every experiment was successful. Sometimes you'd get an unexpected beige. But when it worked, the results were stunning. Vikings weren't colorblind minimalists. They loved a bit of flair. In fact, some Viking graves contained garments with intricate tablet-woven trim, narrow bands woven separately and sewn onto hems and cuffs like medieval bling. These weren't for warmth. They were for showing off. A well-trimmed tunic said, "Yes, I know how to raid and accessorize." You step closer to the weaver, watching her repeat the same pattern, line after line. It's hypnotic, soothing even, like a lullaby made of wool. She pauses and lifts a strand to inspect a knot. Not perfect, but good enough. That's a theme out here, functional beauty. Clothes weren't throwaway items, they were investments. Passed down, patched up, refitted. You could trace a family's history in a sleeve stitching. If someone died, their cloak might be cut and reshaped into a child's tunic or used as burial wrapping. Every scrap had value. Which brings you to one of the Viking world's lesser-known heroes, the needle. Oh yes, needles were precious. Usually made of bone or bronze, carefully shaped with eyes just large enough for coarse thread or sinew. A skilled seamstress, or tailor, if you were in a trade center, could sew without patterns, measuring everything by hand, intuition, and experience. There were no sizes, no labels, no dressing rooms. Clothes were made to fit you, your arms, your stride, your life. You overhear a younger woman fretting over a new tunic she's sewing for her betrothed. "He wants sleeves like Sigurd's," she mutters. But Sigurd's arms are like tree trunks. She rolls her eyes. Everyone chuckles. It's strangely relatable, isn't it? Even 1,000 years ago, people still stressed over gift-giving, fashion trends, and making things just right. You wonder if Viking teens ever refused to wear what their mothers made them. Ugh, Mom, green is so last season. Still, there's a pride here that's hard to miss. No one's rushing. No one's cutting corners. Whether it's for daily wear or something ceremonial, maybe a wedding, maybe a sacrifice, you get the sense that these people care. About texture, about detail, about how a thing feels on the skin. And if you listen close, you'll catch something even more precious than laughter. Silence. The kind of contented quiet that comes from hands knowing what they're doing. From spinning, weaving, and sewing not just to stay clothed, but to stay connected. To ancestors. To seasons. To rhythm. The air shifts slightly, and you hear the low clunk of the loom's heddle being moved. Then another. And another. Like a heartbeat. You exhale. Slow. Centered. You're not just watching people make clothes. You're watching them make time visible. Row by row. Thread by thread. A history not written in ink, but worn on the body, carried through generations, patched with care and still good for another winter. And you? You feel warmer just watching it happen. You turn away from the quiet of the loom and follow the sound of a low, steady rhythm, wood on wood, like a distant drum played with hesitation. It leads you toward a half-open workshop where two men are bent over something, elbows deep in a long wooden trough. A boy sits nearby, whittling a stick into what might one day be a spoon, or possibly a spear. It's hard to tell at this stage. What's easier to see, though, is what's in the trough. Leather. And it smells, well, let's call it earthy and leave it at that. Tonight, you've found the tanners, the folks in charge of making sure everyone's boots don't disintegrate the moment they step into a bog. And what a process it is. Vikings didn't have chrome-based chemicals or PVC-coated synthetics. They had hides, time, and really strong stomachs. Tanning animal hides into usable leather required a cocktail of ingredients you'd think twice about even sniffing: stale urine, brains, dung, and a dash of elbow grease. Yes, urine, and sometimes animal brains. Apparently, brains contain just the right mix of enzymes and fats to help soften and preserve hides. There's even a phrase for it. Every animal has enough brain to tan its own hide, which is poetic, if a little gross. You step a bit closer and get a better view of the soaking process. The raw hide is first dehaired, soaked in lye or fermented urine to loosen the follicles. Then, someone, usually an unlucky apprentice, scrapes it with a crescent-shaped tool called a fleshing knife. It's not glamorous, but it gets the job done. And once the hide's smooth and pliable, it's time for the real alchemy, transforming it into something durable, waterproof, and wearable. That's where the tanning agents come in, typically oak bark or hemlock soaked in water for weeks to release tannins. The hide soaks in this for days or even months, depending on how thick and tough you want the final product to be. Historians still debate whether Viking tanning methods were truly consistent across settlements or if local customs, based on regional flora, produced very different textures and colors of leather. Some preserved scraps show surprisingly fine craftsmanship, while others seem crude and stiff. Either way, it wasn't just about function. A well-made leather sheath or belt could signal status just as much as a flashy cloak. The boy stops whittling to ask the older man something, and you catch a snippet. "Can I carve runes on it once it's dry?" The man grunts and nods. Because of course, once you've made the leather, it's a canvas. Belts, pouches, boots, and knife sheaths were often decorated. Not with flamboyant flair, but with purpose. Spirals, animal shapes, knotwork, and runes, all tiny stories pressed or cut into the surface. And then there are shoes. Forget the cliché of barefoot berserkers sprinting across snowy fjords. Viking shoes were simple but clever, made from a single piece of leather, folded and stitched to cradle the foot like a second skin. Flexible, soft-soled, and surprisingly elegant in their minimalism. Not ideal for mountain hikes, but perfect for the wooden floors and dirt paths of daily life. You pass a wall lined with them, some in progress, some clearly worn and awaiting repairs. You reach out and run your fingers over one. It's soft, worn smooth, and smells faintly of smoke and bark. Not a bad combo, actually. The men are now rubbing oil into a finished hide, pulling it taut over a curved wooden frame. The oil is rendered animal fat, goose, pig, maybe even seal. It makes the leather supple, resistant to water, and, let's be honest, gives it a bit of a glow-up. You can't help but admire the patience. The repetitive, meditative rhythm of the work. One man hums, low and tuneless. Not for your benefit, just for his own pacing. And that rhythm echoes other parts of Viking life. The idea that nothing good happens quickly, that everything worth keeping, clothes, tools, relationships, has to be treated, scraped, soaked, stretched, softened, and tested. Whether it's a leather satchel or the community itself, it's the slow burn that keeps things together. One quirky detail catches your eye. A pair of boots, clearly made for a child, has a little stitched patch in the shape of a wolf's paw. A joke? A symbol of bravery? A reminder of a favorite story? No way to know. But it says something about the people here. Even with limited materials, they still made room for charm. You step outside for a breath of cleaner air and find a stretch of rawhide hanging in the wind, drying stiff and glossy like parchment. It rustles when the breeze hits it, like ghost paper. And suddenly, you realize, this isn't just a workshop. It's a kind of quiet forge. Not for fire and metal, but for texture, endurance, and usefulness. For making things that survive. The tanners might not be the flashiest folks in the village, but their work walks with everyone, every day, from the youngest child to the battle-scarred jarl. It carries tools, protects feet, binds blades, and bundles herbs. It's the undercurrent of Viking life. So next time you see an ancient shoe in a museum, curled, cracked, forgotten, maybe remember this workshop. The trough, the boy, the patient hands, the silent pride. And maybe, just maybe, appreciate your own shoes a little more in the morning. You're walking again, this time along the outer edge of the village, where the land meets the trees. A gentle hush falls over the world, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. The scent shifts here too, away from the sharp tang of smoke and leather, towards something cooler, greener, damper. You pause by a mossy log, and that's when you see it. A woman kneeling beside a basket, hands dipped into a shallow, clay-lined pit. She's stirring something, her sleeves rolled high, her focus absolute. You move closer and peer over the edge. Soap, or what passes for soap, which, as it turns out, is not soap at all. Vikings didn't have bars of Dove or lemon-scented body wash, but they weren't as filthy as modern myths suggest either. Personal hygiene mattered, especially in a society where close-quarters living meant that smell could quickly turn from inconvenience to social suicide. What you're watching is the art of lye soap, sort of. The Vikings' cleansing concoctions were often made by mixing water with wood ash to produce lye, a caustic alkaline solution. Add in animal fat, boiled down and rendered, and you've got something close to a primitive soap. Or, in many cases, just lye alone. That's right. Lye water was often used directly on skin, especially when no fat was available. Harsh. Absolutely. But surprisingly effective at cutting through grease and grime after days of working in the fields or rowing across cold seas. You squint at the woman's hands. They're red and calloused, well acquainted with the burn of caustic cleaning. She doesn't wince, though, just scrubs at a strip of fabric, then holds it up to the light. And here's where it gets a little quirky. Vikings also used fermented urine. Yes, again, you're sensing a theme here. Urine contains ammonia, which is a powerful cleaning agent. When left to ferment, sometimes for weeks, it becomes pungent, potent, and strangely effective for laundering clothes or even bleaching hair. Some records suggest that warriors, particularly the more flamboyant ones, would rinse their hair in aged urine to achieve a paler, golden hue. For intimidation? For style? Historians still argue whether it was a sign of vanity or a ritual of status. Either way, you imagine the scent lingered. And while the modern mind recoils, the Viking world just saw it as resourcefulness. Waste wasn't waste, it was raw material. Whether for cleaning, tanning, dyeing, or even medicine. Back at the pit, the woman pours the mix into a hollowed-out trough, ready for soaking laundry. A few tunics, some rough wool, a length of flax cloth. The fabric bubbles slightly as the lye seeps in. A chemical reaction, yes, but also a daily ritual. One repeated across households, across generations. You glance at a younger girl nearby, scrubbing a pair of woolen leggings on a rough board. She sings softly to herself in Old Norse, the tune bright and rhythmic. A cleaning song, the kind you hum without thinking, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, unchanged for centuries. Water was essential for all this, of course, which is why settlements like this one sprang up near streams or springs. Not just for drinking or cooking, but for washing, soaking, and rinsing. The cleaner the source, the better. Though, clean is a relative term when everyone upstream is also scrubbing tunics and dumping old dye vats. There's a bowl of herbs sitting beside the pit. Thyme, maybe, or yarrow. Viking women often added fragrant or antimicrobial herbs to their wash water, not just for smell, but for function. Juniper, for example, could deter lice. Birch leaves added a fresh, almost minty note, a makeshift fabric softener, if you will. And when soap wasn't available or was too precious to use, Vikings sometimes bathed with sand or clay, rubbing it onto the skin, then rinsing with cold water. Abrasive, yes, but surprisingly effective at removing grime. The exfoliation trend, it turns out, is nothing new. One particularly odd detail stands out from the sagas. Certain Icelandic settlers reportedly used goose droppings mixed with ash and sour milk to wash particularly stubborn stains. Whether this actually worked or just made everything smell like a haunted breakfast is unclear. Scholars remain divided. But beyond the ingredients, it's the ritual itself that feels soothing. Scrub, rinse, wring, hang. A cycle of labor and cleansing. The repetitive gestures, the soft slosh of water, the way light catches on damp cloth as it's draped to dry over wooden poles or low bushes. You wander among the drying lines. Tunics in muted shades, ochre, gray, greenish-brown flutter in the breeze like sleepy flags. You reach out and touch one. It's coarse, damp, still holding the scent of lye and air. There's a comfort in knowing that everyone here, raiders, traders, mothers, smiths, shares this ritual. It's not glamorous, but it's grounding. In a world of swords and storms, of long journeys and sea monsters, sometimes the most essential thing is just a clean tunic and warm socks. You hear laughter from the girls by the washing pit. Someone splashed someone else. A very old joke. And for a moment, you imagine that same splash happening 1,000 years ago, somewhere else along another stream, with different voices, same song. And isn't that the strangest thing? That something as boring as Viking laundry can still echo into your ears tonight in the quiet. That even in the age of smartphones and scented candles, part of you understands this moment. The work, the water, the soft hum of clean. You take a final look at the pit, the herbs, the drying lines. Then head back toward the village, cleaner in spirit, if not in smell. You leave the washing pit behind and wander deeper into the village, where the soundscape shifts again. Instead of water or wood, now there's a gentle clang, a rhythmic tapping that echoes softly against wooden beams and stone. You follow the sound to a small smithy, the village's heart of fire and metal. A burly man with soot-blackened arms is hammering steadily on a glowing piece of iron, sending sparks dancing in the dusk. The heat radiates toward you in soft waves, like a cozy hearth. This is no battlefield forge. This is daily life, where tools, nails, and horseshoes come to be. But what really catches your attention is the faint, unusual aroma curling around the forge, not just smoke or hot metal, but something almost herbal. You step closer and notice small bundles of twigs tucked near the fire, releasing a delicate scent of juniper and birch. These herbs aren't just for smell. Vikings believed that burning certain woods and plants while forging metal would strengthen the blade, or at least, that's the theory. Historians still argue whether this was practical metallurgy or ritualized superstition, but it's fascinating to imagine blacksmiths weaving magic into their daily grind. Your eyes settle on the glowing blade itself, a knife with a gently curved edge, shaped carefully to balance sharpness with strength. The smith is working it methodically, folding and hammering to create layers of steel. This is pattern welding, a technique Vikings mastered, giving their weapons resilience and unique rippling patterns on the blade. But back to the smell, the herbs are key. Birchwood, for instance, burns clean and hot, while juniper adds antiseptic properties. Some believe that the smoke warded off evil spirits during the forging, protecting the smith and his work. You imagine that to Viking ears, the hiss of fire was part furnace, part ritual chant. Next to the forge, you spot a rough wooden box filled with tiny leather pouches. Inside each, you find a small handful of powdered charcoal, powdered bone, and something mysterious, a dark, resinous substance that glimmers faintly. This, the smith explains without ceremony, is bog iron residue, iron harvested from peat bogs. It's heavier to work but imbues a certain resilience to the metal. Speaking of bogs, did you know Vikings also used peat as a fuel source? Unlike wood, peat burns slowly and steadily, perfect for keeping fires alive overnight. The smell of smoldering peat is earthy, smoky, and a little sweet. It's an olfactory reminder of the land itself, compressed and preserved over millennia. Nearby, a young apprentice tries his hand at tempering a small dagger. He dips it into a trough of cold water, producing a burst of steam that clouds the air. The smith watches, offering quiet advice and the occasional nod. You lean in, fascinated by the balance between brute force and subtle control. The smith's art is as much about timing and feel as it is about muscle. He hammers, bends, cools, and repeats, coaxing the metal to life. And yet, this wasn't just about weapons. Vikings forged hooks, needles, fishhooks, and tools for farming and crafting. Every household had at least one sharp blade, kept honed for utility or defense. You can almost picture the smith's hands, calloused and steady, as they crafted not only tools but everyday objects, the hinges on a door, the fittings on a ship, the rings that bound bundles of cloth. Oddly enough, Viking smiths sometimes embedded small bits of meteorite iron into their work. Known as sky iron, meteorite metal was rare and prized, thought to carry celestial power. Imagine wielding a blade partly made from a star that fell from the heavens. The smith tells you that his family has passed down the craft for generations. Each blade carries a bit of their history, marked with a simple rune, a personal signature etched into the steel. You notice a small knife resting against the anvil, its handle carved from antler, smooth and worn. The carving is subtle, a serpent coiled in mid-strike. Norse legends often invoked serpents and dragons as symbols of power and protection. It's a reminder that even the most utilitarian objects carried meaning beyond the practical. As you watch the apprentice make his final strike and the blade cools in water, the smith offers you a nod of satisfaction. A good blade, he says softly, is like a good story. It's made with care, patience, and a little bit of fire. You can feel the truth in that. The smith's forge is more than a place of heat and hammering. It's a crucible of community, craft, and quiet magic. You step back, the smell of smoke and herbs lingering in your nose, and head toward the village center. The fire's warmth fades behind you, but the rhythm of the smith's hammer stays with you, a steady pulse in the fading light. You drift away from the forge, the faint crackle of embers growing distant, and your steps lead you toward the longhouse's bustling interior. The murmur of voices and the clinking of wooden bowls become your new soundtrack as you cross the threshold into the warmth of communal life. Inside, the air is thick with the savory scent of roasted meat, smoky peat, and the faint tang of fermented drinks. You settle onto a rough-hewn bench along the wall, watching as the household gathers around the central hearth, a fire that crackles and dances, sending gentle warmth to every corner. In Viking culture, food wasn't just nourishment, it was ritual, hospitality, and social glue. Meals were shared affairs, often simple but hearty: barley bread, salted fish, preserved berries, and ale brewed from local grains. But what surprises you is the array of spices and flavorings, some from far beyond the icy fjords. Trade routes, especially the famous Silk Road, brought exotic flavors to even the remotest settlements. Cinnamon, black pepper, and even saffron were prized commodities, glimpses of distant lands in a world where travel was slow and perilous. Historians still debate how common these spices really were in everyday Viking kitchens, but even small traces hint at a surprisingly cosmopolitan palate. The food smells comforting, the kind of cooking that seeps into your bones and invites slow conversation. You watch a woman ladle thick, savory stew into wooden bowls, a mix of root vegetables, dried fish, and fresh herbs. The broth is rich and amber-colored, steam curling in soft waves. Beside her, a man carves a slab of salted pork, the meat glistening with fat. Preservation was key in a land where winter could last for half the year. Salted and smoked foods kept families fed when fresh game and vegetables were scarce. You spot a bowl of pickled cabbage nearby, an early form of sauerkraut, fermented to last and packed with vitamins. The Vikings were practical, making the most of what nature offered, and knew a thing or two about fermentation. You can almost taste the tangy bite, the cool crunch after a long day outdoors. And then, the drinks. Ale was the beverage of choice, dark, robust, and brewed with barley, herbs, and sometimes honey. Mead, made from fermented honey and water, was reserved for special occasions and celebrations. It was sweet, floral, and intoxicating, the nectar of feasts and festivities. An intriguing tidbit here: some Viking brewers experimented with birch sap and juniper berries, creating lightly flavored drinks that tasted of the forest itself. Imagine sipping a cool brew that smells like pine needles and fresh rain, nature in a cup. Laughter bubbles from a corner where a group of men share tales, their voices low and rhythmic. Storytelling was central to Viking culture, histories, myths, and genealogies passed orally across generations. These weren't just entertainment, they reinforced identity and social bonds. You lean back, letting the warmth and sounds envelop you. The clatter of wooden spoons, the scrape of knives on bowls, the occasional crackle of the fire. It's a lullaby of everyday life. You notice a small child tugging at an elder's sleeve, pointing eagerly at a wooden platter piled with tiny cakes made from oats and honey. Sweet treats were rare but treasured. Vikings also enjoyed wild berries, bilberries, cloudberries, and lingonberries, either fresh or dried for winter. A strange but fascinating note: in some sagas, warriors were said to have eaten frozen fish as a form of refreshment during long journeys, essentially ancient energy bars, if you will. Preserved fish was lightweight, nutrient-dense, and an early form of portable rations. Historians debate how widespread this practice was, but it paints a vivid picture of Viking endurance. As the evening stretches, the conversations soften, voices dipping into sleepy tones. You sip a bit of thick, warm ale and feel the heaviness of the day settle comfortably over your limbs. In this moment, surrounded by the scent of hearth and home, you realize that Viking food wasn't just about survival. It was about comfort, community, and making even the harshest days a little softer. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you think back to that stew, the sharp bite of fermented cabbage, and the faint sweetness of honey cakes. Simple pleasures, enduring through time. The warmth from the longhouse fire still clings softly to your skin as you step back into the cool evening air. The village has quieted, and the sky overhead is a tapestry of stars shimmering faintly against the deep indigo. You begin to wander toward the shoreline, where the faint smell of salt and seaweed mingles with the crisp night breeze. Near the water's edge, you find fishermen cleaning their nets and preparing for the next day's early catch. Their hands move deftly, pulling tangled ropes and mending holes with practiced ease. Fishing was not just a livelihood, but a rhythm of Viking life, tied closely to the tides and seasons. You settle on a smooth rock, watching the gentle lap of waves against the shore. The sea is a dark mirror, holding secrets and stories alike. Vikings believed the ocean was both a giver and a taker source of sustenance, but also a path to the unknown. You notice the fishermen using unusual tools, small scrapers carved from bone and antler to clean fish scales, and baskets woven tightly from willow branches to hold their catch. These baskets, lightweight yet strong, were essential for hauling fish back to shore without losing precious cargo. An interesting detail, some coastal Viking communities used nets weighted with small stones, a technique that historians still debate whether was homegrown or influenced by Mediterranean traders. It's a small but telling glimpse into the interconnectedness of medieval trade. Nearby, a flicker of torchlight reveals a small smokehouse built on stilts over the water. Inside, fish hang from hooks, slowly curing in the gentle heat and smoke. The smell is faintly sweet and woody, a signature of preservation methods that kept food edible through long winters and voyages. You breathe in deeply, letting the briny scent mix with the smoke and pine from inland forests. It's a complex aroma, like nature's own seasoning blend. Suddenly, a low hum drifts across the water, a fisherman's chant, slow and rhythmic, meant to ease the burden of work and invite good fortune from the sea. Music and song were integral to Viking life, often tied to labor and ritual, offering a soothing cadence amid hard days. The chant fades, and you turn your gaze toward the horizon where faint outlines of fishing boats bob gently. Their sails are furled for the night, but come dawn, they will set out again, braving chilly waters and unpredictable weather to bring back the day's bounty. Here on the shore, you glimpse a small stash of unusual seaweed laid out on flat stones. Vikings harvested edible seaweed, rich in minerals and flavor, and sometimes dried it for winter use. The salty crunch of dried seaweed might seem odd to modern palates, but it was a valued food source and a reminder of the ocean's generosity. You sit back, the cool rock pressing against your legs, and watch the stars wool slowly overhead. The smell of salt, smoke, and wood lingers, wrapping you in a gentle embrace. It strikes you how Vikings turned the elements, earth, fire, water, and air, into resources for everyday survival. They wove nature into their routines, crafting tools, food, and even beliefs from the world around them. As you sit quietly, the ocean whispers softly, a lullaby older than time itself. You feel the pull of the tides in your chest, a gentle reminder of your smallness and the vastness. Historians still argue about how much Vikings saw the sea as a living entity versus a mere resource, but either way, its presence shaped their days and dreams. Your eyelids grow heavy with the rhythm of waves and the cool night air. The shore feels like a resting place between worlds, land and sea, wakefulness and sleep. And as the stars twinkle quietly above, you drift with the tide, carried gently toward dreams. You rise from the shoreline and head back toward the village, the crunch of gravel soft beneath your feet. The night is deepening, and the sky, now cloaked in velvet darkness, speckled with distant stars, seems to lean closer, as if inviting you into a quieter, slower rhythm. Back in the village, flickering candlelight spills through small windows, casting a golden glow that softens the rough edges of wooden walls. The longhouse stands silent now, save for the gentle creaks and sighs of settling timber. Inside, the hearth is burned low, its embers faintly glowing like sleepy eyes in the dark. You pause by a small outbuilding, the bathhouse, or more accurately, the washing hut. Viking hygiene wasn't about elaborate plumbing or perfumed lotions. It was about practicality and ritual. You peer inside and see a large wooden tub filled with steaming water, heated over a small fire beneath. Bathing was often a communal affair, especially during colder months when the warmth of the steam was as important as cleanliness. You imagine the soft hiss of water mingling with the crackle of peat fire, the air thick with the mingled scents of pine wood smoke and the faint bitterness of juniper berries. Vikings didn't use soap as we know it. Soap was rare and expensive, but instead relied on abrasives like sand, ash, and even animal fats to scrub away dirt. The ash acted as a natural cleanser, mildly alkaline, and helped remove oils and grime. You also learn that Vikings frequently used a tool called strigil, a curved piece of wood or bone, to scrape the skin, helping to exfoliate dead cells and dirt. This scraping was a gentle, rhythmic process, almost meditative in its repetition. Interestingly, some Viking washing rituals included rubbing with fragrant herbs like lavender and rosemary. While historians still argue whether these were practical hygiene measures or more symbolic, it's easy to imagine the calming effect of herbal scents in a chilly, smoky hut. Nearby, bundles of birch twigs tied together, known as vita or vasta in Finnish sauna culture, were sometimes used to gently beat the skin, improving circulation and releasing tension. Vikings may have practiced similar customs, blending cleansing with relaxation. You imagine the soothing sensation, the soft snap of twigs against warm skin, the steam swirling in gentle waves around the small space. It's a far cry from modern showers, but a rich sensory ritual all the same. Beyond cleanliness, bathing was also social and spiritual. Clean skin was thought to ward off evil spirits and illness, connecting hygiene with well-being in a holistic way. The washing hut's wooden benches are worn smooth from generations of use, and the air holds a quiet history of whispered conversations and shared moments. As you step back into the night, you take a deep breath, the lingering scent of pine and smoke filling your lungs. You feel a subtle warmth in your muscles, the kind that comes from ritual care and the simple act of cleansing. The moon hangs low, casting silver shadows across the village, and you realize how intimate and grounded Viking life was, even in its daily routines. Historians still debate how often Vikings bathed, but evidence suggests they prized cleanliness more than many contemporaries, which may partly explain their fearsome reputation. After all, a clean warrior is a confident warrior. You smile softly to yourself, imagining the feel of scraped skin and warm water, oddly soothing in its simplicity, and continue your slow stroll through the village, the sounds of night crickets and distant owls accompanying your thoughts. The village sleeps soundly now, and your footsteps lead you toward the outskirts, where a grove of ancient trees stands like silent sentinels under the moonlight. The cool night air carries the faint scent of moss and earth, grounding you in this moment of quiet solitude. You find yourself drawn to a small clearing where a modest stone altar sits, its surface worn smooth by countless seasons. This is a place of reflection and ritual, a sacred spot where Vikings might have sought blessings, guidance, or simple moments of peace. Viking spirituality was deeply woven into everyday life, blending reverence for nature with practical concerns. Gods and spirits weren't distant beings, but intimate presences, entwined with daily routines and natural cycles. You imagine the soft murmur of prayers offered here, the faint glow of oil lamps flickering against the altar's rough surface. Offerings of herbs, grains, or carved tokens might have been left to honor the land, sea, and ancestors. One curious practice involves the use of fragrant plants, not only for scent, but believed to have protective powers. Sweetgrass, juniper, and even certain flowers were burned or placed near homes to cleanse the air and invite good fortune. Historians still argue about the extent to which Viking religious rituals were public ceremonies or private moments. Either way, these quiet acts connected individuals to a larger sense of place and purpose. You settle onto a soft patch of moss, the cool earth cushioning you, and let your fingers brush against the rough bark of a nearby tree. The night is alive with subtle sounds, the rustle of leaves, distant bird calls, the faint hum of insects. A gentle breeze stirs the air, carrying with it the delicate aroma of pine needles and damp earth. You close your eyes briefly, breathing deeply, feeling the rhythm of the natural world pulse around you. In these quiet moments, you appreciate how Viking life was a balance of survival and reverence, how everyday acts, from bathing to meal sharing to these small rituals, were imbued with meaning. You recall the stories you heard earlier, the salty tang of preserved fish, the scratch of ash against skin, the steady call of the sea, and feel them weave together like threads in a tapestry. The night deepens, and your thoughts slow, drifting toward a calm stillness. You realize that Viking life, far from the harsh and violent caricature sometimes painted, was rich with textures, rhythms, and gentle traditions. As the stars wheel overhead, you allow yourself to sink into the quiet, the softness of moss, and the cool night air a lullaby for your senses. Historians may still debate many details, but one truth is clear. Vikings lived fully in the moment, finding beauty and comfort in simple, enduring rituals. You let the calm settle over you like a warm blanket, your breath slowing, your body relaxing. Soon, the boundaries between past and present blur, and you drift towards sleep, carried on the gentle whispers of this ancient world. You awaken gently in the early light, the first pale rays of dawn filtering through the branches above. The village stirs slowly, soft murmurs of waking voices, the faint creak of doors, the steady rhythm of footsteps on dew-kissed earth. The day begins quietly, the promise of routine and ritual unfolding like a gentle tide. You walk back toward the heart of the settlement, the smell of wood smoke mingling with fresh bread baking somewhere nearby. The scent is warm and inviting, a small comfort after the cool night air. Breakfast is simple but nourishing: dark rye bread, thick slices of smoked fish, and perhaps a handful of berries or dried fruits from the last harvest. Food was fuel, yes, but also a social glue that brought families and neighbors together. You observe the cooking area where a large cauldron bubbles over an open fire. Inside, porridge thickens slowly, infused with wild herbs and a touch of honey, sweetness valued as a rare treat. Interestingly, Vikings prized fermented foods like sauerkraut and skyr, believing these kept the stomach strong and the body resilient. The science behind probiotics may be modern, but their practical wisdom was centuries ahead. As you watch, you notice a small child playing nearby, gently mimicking the motions of stirring and serving. Teaching through imitation was a cornerstone of Viking upbringing, preparing the young for a lifetime of shared responsibility. Historians still debate how structured Viking education was, but it's clear that life skills and storytelling were passed down organically, woven into daily activities like meal preparation. You feel the warmth of the fire on your face and listen to the low murmur of voices sharing news, plans, and quiet jokes. The sense of community is palpable, a network of ties that bound individuals through work, ritual, and care. Suddenly, a gentle breeze carries the faint clatter of tools from the blacksmith's workshop. Sparks fly softly as iron meets stone, the rhythmic hammering a steady heartbeat of village life. You recall the earlier scenes, the rough tools used for bathing, the carefully woven fishing baskets, the stone altar touched by countless hands. Each small detail builds a picture of a people deeply connected to their environment, their routines, and each other. As you take a final breath of fresh morning air, the landscape seems to stretch endlessly: fields, forests, and sea all melding into one vast, breathing world. You feel the pulse of that world under your feet, steady and strong, and realize that the story of Viking hygiene and daily life is really a story of human resilience and creativity. Now, as your eyes grow heavy and your mind begins to drift, remember these scenes: the sound of waves, the scrape of ash on skin, the warmth of a shared fire. Let them carry you softly into dreams, wrapped in the gentle embrace of a world both ancient and surprisingly familiar. Wind down. The day fades gently now, and your breath slows with the quiet unfolding of night. The sounds of the village soften, becoming distant echoes, like a lullaby whispered through the trees. You feel the weight of your body sink into softness, the edges of your awareness blurring into calm. Imagine the warmth of that longhouse fire, the smoky scent wrapping you like a familiar blanket. Feel the gentle coolness of ocean breezes and the soft caress of moss beneath your fingertips. Let the peaceful rhythm of waves and the muted hum of a sleepy village lull you deeper into stillness. There is no hurry here, no urgency, only the slow pulse of earth and water, the steady turning of stars overhead. The small rituals of the past remind us that peace often lives in simple acts: washing, sharing food, offering thanks. You are safe in this space between wakefulness and dreams, held by the stories of people long gone but never forgotten. Let your mind drift with the tides, your thoughts grow soft and scattered like leaves on a quiet pond. And when sleep finally comes, may it be deep, restorative, and sweet. Good night.